That's not exactly what Simcha is. Simcha is much more complex. I'm a school social worker, and I've worked in several institutions at this point. And recently, a student reached out to me that I'd worked with years and years and years ago, and she sent me a WhatsApp message, and she said, I remember this time we were sitting and we were having this like deep conversation about what I want to be when I grow up, and I gave my answer in front of a room of 23 people, and I said that what I want to be when I grow up is happy. And you looked at me and said that wasn't such a great goal. And I told her that it was indefinable. I told her that I don't know exactly what it means. And if all you want to do when you grow up is to be happy, then you're probably going to be disappointed. Because we think of happiness as this elusive thing when all things are perfect, when nothing goes wrong. And if that's our goal, if that's our definition of happiness, I'm telling you, we're bound to disappoint ourselves. So instead of just being, the nice social worker that said, yeah, that's a nice goal, be happy, I crushed your dreams. And she wrote me back now to say that she thinks she gets it. That what she wants instead of just be happy is to have a life of meaning, to have challenge if it's in order to achieve something. That just to be in a constant state of happiness, that's not what we're looking for in our lives. When I think about happiness, I remember when I was 9 years old and I was the lead in the camp play. And it was Charlie Brown, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and I was Lucy. And the song that, the famous song from the play is called Happiness Is. So I'm going to read you the lyrics. Happiness is finding a pencil. Pizza with sausage, not for us. Telling the time. Happiness is learning to whistle. Tying your shoes for the very first time. Happiness is playing the drum in your own school band. And happiness is walking hand in hand. Happiness is 2 kinds of ice cream. Knowing a secret. Climbing a tree. Happiness is 5 different crayons. Catching a firefly. Setting him free. Happiness is being alone every now and then, and happiness is coming home again. Happiness is morning and evening, daytime and nighttime too, for happiness is anyone and anything at all that's loved by you. Happiness is having a sister, sharing a sandwich, getting along. Happiness is singing together when day is through, and happiness is those who sing with you. So it's a beautiful song for kids, and there's lots of things in there that I've enjoyed myself. Happiness is having a sister and a sandwich. But what happens when you don't get the sandwich and you don't have 5 crayons? In all of these examples, happiness is outside of you, except for one example that they give of happiness is being alone every now and then. And I guarantee when people hear this song, that's the one that's like, really? I don't want to be alone. I don't know how to be alone. I need my phone. I need background noise. I don't know how to just do it. Everything else, happiness is catching a firefly. Happiness is holding hands. But what happens in our life when we can't hold hands? And if all of our ideas of happiness are about outside things that must come into our being in order for us to be happy, we're really in trouble. Happiness is this elusive thing. I don't know how we grab it, how we hold on to it. I'm hoping that's what we're going to look through today, trying to understand what the Jewish idea is of happiness, and if it is these things, if it are these things that we can catch and lose. I was reading about, in preparation for this class, I was reading about a lot of different studies that have been done about happiness and what happiness means and how to stay happy. And in this one very fascinating research that I was looking into, it talked about how happiness is not one static thing. That when researchers spoke to individuals and read blog posts, like millions and millions of blog posts about how people define their happiness, they saw that in different stages of our life, happiness meant something else. So happiness for a child or an adolescent is about discovery, about finding something new, being excited, trying something for the first time. Happiness in our mid-20s is about the pursuit. It's about working for something, about gaining skills and learning and approaching something that's more at a distance. Happiness in our late 20s and our early 30s is balance, about finding a home, about feeling stable within ourselves. It's less of the flash and more about the inward, ever burning flame. It's the balance of life that brings us happiness in our late 20s and early 30s. And in our late 30s and 40s, it's about meaning. It's about knowing that I do the right thing, that I'm going to do the thing of purpose, and I'm going to do the next right thing again and again and again. And in our 50s and onward, it's about savoring. It's about really enjoying that conversation or the cup of tea or the trip that we go on. It's being in the moment. It's shifting our perspective from outwards to inwards. And it was interesting in this research, what they described is they played music for young people and old people. And they played upbeat music and more rhythmic, soft, introspective music. And as you can imagine, the young people said that the upbeat music made them happy. And for the older people, the more calming sounds made them happy. But then they gave them a prompt. And they asked the young people to envision something of meaning or of purpose or to think of their future. And when they did that, they played them the songs, then they picked the slower music. And for the older people, when they asked them to be in the moment, then they picked the happy music. So we're wondering already, we're wondering still. Now we're seeing the questions about happiness. What does it mean? It's not one thing. Happiness is not just having a sandwich. There's different definitions of happiness. And I'm curious about what it means to be happy in Judaism. So the amazing woman that we're going to learn about today is Elisheva. The truth is, she's only mentioned once in all of Chumash by name. So if you blink, you wouldn't have noticed that she was there. Elisheva is the wife of Aaron HaKohen, the brother of Moshe Rabbeinu. So I'm going to read to you from the Gemara and then a Medrash. So in the Gemara, this is what it says about Elisheva. Elisheva, we're going to learn a lot of names right now, okay? Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav and the wife of Aaron, had 5 more reasons for happiness, for joy, than any other daughter of Israel on the day that the tabernacle was dedicated. Her brother-in-law Moses was a king. Her husband Aaron was the high priest. Her son Eleazar was the deputy high priest. Her son's son, Pinchas, was the priest anointed for war, who would lead the army out into battle. And her brother Nachshon, son of Aminadav, was the prince of the tribe of Judah, who brought his offering on the day as the first of all the princes. So everybody in her life was celebrating. Everybody around her, all of the men that were in her life, were having these elated, extravagant moments of flashing high peak experiences. But on that same day of joy, she was in mourning for her 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, who died on that day. 2 of her sons went in to offer up an offering. They did something that was wrong. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe they were out of line. Maybe they did it with the wrong intention, and they were killed. So she is the example of the person who had the utmost happiness of all the daughters of Israel. She had 5 more joys. Now, this seems like a crazy text. It's begging for you to ask questions about it. What do you mean? All these other people who maybe they didn't have as many of their family members being put into these positions of power, but they didn't have 2 of their children pass away. None of them had happiness more than hers. How can that be? So that's the Gemara. Now we're going to read the Medrash, which is similar but not exactly the same. The Medrash says, Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav, had no happiness in the world. She saw 5 crowns in one day. Her brother-in-law, Moshe, was king. Her brother, the prince, her husband, a Kohen Gadol, her 2 sons were deputy priests. Her grandson, Pinchas, was the priest anointed to war since her 2 sons, but at the same time, her 2 sons came in to make a sacrifice and were killed. Her happiness switched to mourning. The Medrash makes sense. The Medrash makes sense to me. This is a person who knows no happiness in the world. It's supposed to be her moment. She's the wife of the Kohen Gadol, the highest person that there is in Klal Yisrael, other than Moshe Rabbeinu. This is supposed to be her moment. Her 2 sons are dead, eviscerated. Of course she's going to be miserable. The Medrash makes sense. It's the Gemara that makes us rub our heads. Why would she be put forward as the person who has more happiness than other people? It doesn't make any sense. And how can Judaism present these 2 texts? How can we have these 2 texts? One that say that she never knows happiness, and the other that says she's the happiest of all of the Jewish people. How does it make any sense to us? Which is it? Happy or mournful? We can't hold both. And just to sort of beef up the text, to add some more meat to the cholent, I want to talk about who these other men are that are surrounding her. So the first one is Moshe Rabbeinu. I think all of us know a little bit about him, and the thing that the Torah describes him as is humble. He was the person who saw God face to face in a way that none of us can ever imagine. He got as close to God as humanly possible, or superhumanly possible. But the words that the Torah describes him as is as somebody who's humble. What does that mean? What's humility? Humility is knowing who you are and knowing what the task is. Knowing when to rise up, when to take a step back. Understanding your place in the world. We talk about humility as if it means that you think you're a shmata. Humility doesn't mean you're a shmata. It means you get it. You understand who you are. Moshe Rabbeinu, with all of his amazing skills and attachment to God and his deficits, his inability to speak, he knew his place. He knew where he lined up in the cosmos. And that's why he was able to rise up and be such a great leader among the people of Israel. So that's Moshe. That's her brother-in-law. Next is her husband, Aaron HaKohen. So the way that Aaron is described, he's described as the essential peacemaker. They say that when husbands and wives were in argument, the husbands would go to Aaron and the wives would go to Aaron, and he would speak to each of them and bring peace between the couples. There was something about Aaron that knew how to connect the dots, how to be a peacemaker, how to connect things that seemed disparate. He was able to see a bigger picture about what was going on in the world. That was who she was married to. Pinchas, her grandson, so he wasn't supposed to be a Kohen. He earned that by knowing what a moment called for. He received this new position because he saw that a task called for somebody to step forward, and he did it. It's amazing to me that the way that he's described in the text is not as a grandson. He's called the son of a son, meaning that something was inherited. He got some of these skills from the generations before. I don't know about any of you, but I feel like that with many of the people in my family. I look at my grandmother or my mother, and the qualities that they have, it's like seeps into your psyche, even if you don't understand it. You have these values about kindness. I think about my grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, but then when she came to Canada, she decided that she was also going to be a death doula and that she was going to be a foster mother. And my mother stops on the street for every single person that was homeless. And she pushed it upon me and my sister that you're supposed to extend yourself, go beyond yourself. That's what it means to have an inheritance of traits. That all of a sudden, I don't even think about some of these things anymore because it's so natural. That we just use what we've been gifted by the generations before us. So that was Pinchas. And Nachshon, her brother, is also a very interesting character. Nachshon, when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, on their way into the desert, they arrived at the Reed Sea, and they were told to walk on in, even though the waters hadn't parted yet. And Nachshon, Elisheva's brother, was the first to do so. He walked out into the water, and it says that it came up into his neck. That's how brave he was. He walked out into the water, and he knew with full emunah, with full faith, that the water was going to part, that God was going to help him. And it did. And he was the first one to do so, the first revolutionary, the first person to be brave enough to step into the unknown. So that's her brother. So Elisheva has all of these amazing people around. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to see this woman who we don't get so much information about about who she is, but we understand the men around her. So now we got to try to dig into her. Who is she? What's happening to her? Was she mournful? Was she devastated by the loss of her two sons, which we can imagine, right? Or was she the happiest person in all of Klal Yisrael? I mean, it's hard for us to understand, especially maybe we're using the wrong definition. Maybe Simcha isn't happy. Maybe it isn't just joyful. Maybe there's something about this mix of feelings, that it's not all good or all bad, that there's something about how these feelings communicate with one another. So I want to tell you a story. So I wasn't raised religious, and I kind of fought against it. I had very strong identity as a Jew, but I just didn't want to take on more of the halachic observances. But I was learning, and I was surrounded by women who were passionate and articulate and almost too good to be true. That's how I felt. That these women were, I don't know, I just felt like it had to be like a little bit of posturing. It's easy when you, as a teacher, to walk into the room and pretend you have it all together. And I started to think maybe this is an illusion. Like maybe there has to be more to this. It can't be so simple. So I had this one teacher while I was at IAT, Esha Torah's seminary for women. I had this one teacher, and she was brilliant. She came into class with no notes. She wasn't like me, who has to have my cheat sheet. She came in with no notes. She opened up a sefer and just Torah fire came out of her mouth. She was beautiful. She was smart. She was well read. She was kind. She was thoughtful. And I thought, this can't be real. Too good to be true. So I was very sneaky. And I said to her, I want to come to your house for Shabbos to get like a real feeling of what it means to be an Orthodox woman. But I don't want to come at Shabbos, like when all you can have all the bells and whistles and everything can be perfect. I want to come, an hour and a half before Shabbos, so I can see how the magic happens. Or really what I was thinking was I can see the chaos, and then I won't have to become religious because I'll realize that all of this is a farce. So she said, no problem. So Shabbos comes, and it's an hour and a half before Shabbos, maybe 2 hours. I got there a little bit early just to see what it was like. And as I'm walking down the street to come to her apartment, I see a small boy in the streets naked. And he is running around. He has food all over him. He's going crazy in the streets. And then I see my teacher open up her door and say, come back in, come back in, come in. And I thought, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. I don't have to become religious. So I walked into the house, and the little naked boy is sitting on the floor now. He has a pot, and he's banging away. There's a child upstairs screaming, slamming door again and again and again and again. And this is like, it sounds like an exaggeration, like it's almost like a cartoon, but this is exactly what was happening. You walked into the kitchen, and there was a kettle whistling, as if nobody heard it other than me, just whistling and whistling. And I see my beautiful put together teacher, except this time she has like cholent all over her shirt, and she looks like she's in a total mess, completely overwhelmed by the chaos of her life. And I like sit down, and I'm thinking, okay, great, I don't have to be religious. This is amazing. And all of a sudden, another son walks into the room, and he says, Mom, I want to read to you my Mishnayos. I want to read to you what I'm learning in school. And all of a sudden, everything changed. She turned off the oven. The kettle stopped whistling. She took the little boy, put him in another room. She made sure that upstairs was quiet. And she came back down, and she sat at the table, and she put on a pair of pearls. And I was like, what weird custom is this? Is this what people do in Jewish homes? I've never seen such a thing. And she started listening to her son read his homework. And I was like in awe. This was something different. I knew it was something different. And after it was over, I said to her, what was that about? And she said that when my kid reads to me Torah, to me, it's like a taste of Gan Eden. It's like a yichud room. It's like a private chamber between me and God. I take it seriously. I dress up for the occasion. And it wowed me that she was able in the chaos to like cling to skyhooks, to cling to something that wasn't visible, that was deeper than what was happening around her. And it was one of the reasons that I continued to pursue my Jewish roots. Now, years later, I was speaking to another Rebbetzin, Rebbetzin Weinberger, and I told her the story, and she said to me, oh, Bailey, you missed it. You missed it. It's beautiful. It was beautiful that woman put on pearls and found a way to ground herself and center herself. But the trick would have been for her to be that centered and that in awe of her life in the chaos. Because we don't always have the opportunity to stop the chaos. You don't always have the time to sit down and find that time to be happy. It's learning how, while the kettle is whistling and while the doors are slamming and while that drum pot is being beaten, to know who you are and to know what life is about, which is very, very difficult. It's holding on to the chaos and the happiness at the same time. It's not saying happiness is the sister or happiness is the pearls or happiness is holding hands. Because sometimes happiness, we don't get those kinds of opportunities. We don't get the chance to have everything be swept away. The trick is to try to see God and to feel ourselves whole even when we're being tossed in the waves of life. I was thinking about, well, in preparation for this, I was thinking about the amazing holy movie Inside Out and how that's like the chap of the movie. That sadness, Joy thinks that it's her role to direct Riley's life. That as long as sadness can be kept in its own little bubble, that Riley will be happy. But that's not how sadness works. Sadness weaves its way through our life and allows us space. There's that famous lecture that was going around, the last lecture. There's this line in it where he says you can have a choice whether you're going to be Tigger or Eeyore. And I love the last lecture, but I always hated that line. Because it's not true. All of us are a little bit Tigger and a little bit Eeyore. We have to have room for all of the waves of emotion. All of the waves of emotion, and then to cling in for the moment to sadness and cling to the moment for happiness and to know that we're deeper than all of those things. That the real us it fluctuates and it can move, and we have to know what the truth is about who we are. So I want to read to you from Khalil Gibran, from the prophet. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. I'm going to read that line again. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. And the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. How else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? Is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep in your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say, joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep on your bed. Verily you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty are you at a standstill and balanced. When the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, needs must your joy or your sorrow rise or fall. It's such a beautiful, amazing piece. I mean, we could just talk about this piece from Khalil Gibran forever. But what he's suggesting is that the truth is that we're always fluctuating, and that we need the sorrow in order to have the joy. They're not mutually exclusive. They're always embedded within one another. Life is this gray where the happiest moments, if I can speak for myself, the happiest moment of my life at the birth of my child or on my wedding day, there's the absence of my father who passed away when I was young. I can't separate them. They're going to be together forever. And that the desire to shed ourselves of any sadness, it's rooted in falsity. It's a falsehood that we need to let go of. It's Viktor Frankl in his brilliant work. He writes about exactly this idea. He says, our current mental hygiene philosophy stresses the idea that people ought to be happy, that unhappiness is a symptom of maladjustment. Such a value system might be responsible for the fact that the burden of unavoidable unhappiness is increased by unhappiness about being unhappy. Such a value system is responsible for the fact that the burden of unavoidable unhappiness is increased by unhappiness about being unhappy. We're so afraid of sadness. Even if it serves a purpose in helping us as human beings, even if it serves a purpose to help us survive, we learn that sadness is one of the things that assists us in memory. It assists us in being kinder people, more empathetic. It helps us in order to see the world with all of its complexity. Sadness is so deeply a sister of happiness, and we're living in a world where we're like, get the sadness out. I can't deal with these big, complicated feelings. The simcha that Elisheva felt on that day was not simple. It was with all of these different emotions happening at the same time. It was not a pure Charlie Brown kind of happiness. It was happiness that had more weight to it, more complexity. I think if we then look at her ability to not just pause to put on the pearls, but to see her whole life as one big symphony of God. Just one big, not waiting for the perfect violin to play. Everything about her existence was her relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything about it. That's why she was able to have simcha, which I think the word Basimha is the same letters as the word machshava, which means thought. It means thinking about your life. That's what it means to be Basimha. It means to understand, to have the right, clear goggles about what's happening around you. It's not all wine and roses, like my grandmother would say. Life is much more complicated than that. But just like her brother walked into the raging seas and waited for them to split, Elisheva was able to walk into the raging waters of her emotions, all of them, and to hold clear to what was true, to hold fast to Hashem, and to the belief that things are for the good and will be good, even if right now there's no way that I can understand that. If right now it is completely irrational and not able to be felt, I'm going to cling to Hashem, That's what it means to be Basimha. When we look back at all those men that we described who are surrounding her, Moshe, Aaron, Pinchas, Nachshon, let's look again about some of the lessons that they had. Moshe, we said, was humble. He was able to know that he was a part of a larger universe, that he wasn't in control. That was one of the messages that she got. You're not in control. You think that if you become the big, strong Moshe Rabbeinu that you're going to have power. You're not. His strength wasn't in his power. It was in his humility. She took that message and said, be humble. Don't think that you know everything. Don't think that you know even what is the right next step forward. Just trust Hashem. Aaron, the peacemaker, that was her husband. When we greet one another, the phrase that we say is Shalom Aleichem, and the person responds, Aleichem Shalom. But the word Shalom Aleichem, it doesn't really make sense. Shalom Aleichem is plural. So we're saying Shalom to the yous, the many yous. And I heard my husband say once that when you say Shalom Aleichem, what you're wishing to the person in front of you is that they should have peace to all of their parts. You're wishing them peace to all the complicated parts within. The blessing that we give is that all the disparate parts of your identity that you think don't mesh, let them all become one. Be okay with your complexity. Don't try to make yourself simple. Jews are never simple. A true Jewish response is to say that I'm okay with my complexity, that I bask in my complexity. Just like God is complicated and simple, I too am going to be complicated and simple. Pinchas, he wasn't supposed to be a Cohen, but he earned it. He earned his moment by acting righteously. Just do the right thing. That's what the gift that she gave to him. She gave to him the ability to just do the right thing, to know the truth, to cling to it, even when life is so complicated and hard. And Nachshon, who split the sea, this is her splitting the sea. It's her splitting the sea in her own way. I mentioned that Elisheva was only mentioned once in all of Tanakh. And the name Elisheva could mean that God is my oath, or it could mean Elisheva, meaning God is 7, which seems sort of strange. What does it have to do with 7? So, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Ramak says that Aaron Cohen would light the menorah, and that was 7 candles. So he would bring the light, and she would shine forth with the light. That's one reading. Or we could say that there are 7 attributes that we talk about Hashem possessing. So, or all of us possessing, certain midos that we all have. So the 7 midos that we have, the first one is chesed. Chesed, it's translated as loving kindness. The character trait would be warmth or nurturing, loving. The second is the alter ego to love, which is gvura. Gvura means justice, discipline, restraint, awe. It's like the reverse side of chesed. And the truth is, it's easy to say chesed is good and gvura is bad, but it's not the case. If I was to just give an ever-flowing amount of milk to my newborn baby, he would suffocate. I would be waterboarding him. There needs to be a sense of gvura, of limitation. Limitation is also a good thing. We need boundaries, discipline. These are one of the important qualities that we need to have. The third emotion is tiferet. Tiferet is translated as beauty, harmony, compassion. What we say in Yiddish as rachmanis. You need to have compassion for one another. Emotion number 4 is netzach. Netzach literally means victory, but the emotion means endurance, fortitude, ambition. Netzach is the driving force behind every single ambition that we have. Emotion 5 is hod. Translate to humility, splendor, to yielding. Yesod is number 6. Yesod literally means foundation, but it's an emotion about bonding. When you bond with something, it's not just the same thing as experiencing it. It's making it part of who you are. And finally, number 7 is malchus. It literally means kingship or nobility. But on the emotional spectrum, it's leadership, independence, the feeling that we own what it is that we do. So those are the 7 emotions. So Elisheva, my God, is 7, means that Elisheva is the one who connected all the emotions. She was able to take all of these different pieces and say, I'm going to be this tapestry of feeling. I'm not just going to be one or two things. I'm going to be all of the things. It's a pretty revolutionary idea that Elisheva is the one to come to teach us that emotions aren't simple. That you don't just get to pick happy, sad. We're all of those things all of at once. And I want to read to you from Reb Nachman, who has a beautiful mashal about this. He says, sometimes when people are happy, and they dance, they can grab someone from outside of the circle. and bring them in. I'm sure all of us have been at a simcha where you're standing on the side and you don't want to be part of the festivities, but someone like brings you in, and then you have a choice. You get into it. The music starts speaking to you. Suddenly you forget why you were sad. You get into the moment. Or you can be sad while dancing. I don't know if any of you had that experience, where the feelings don't just evaporate, but you bring them into the circle. Against their will, this person is brought into the circle of dancers. Against his will, they force him to be happy among them. It's the same with happiness. When a person is happy, gloom and suffering stand aside. Yet greater still is to gather courage to actually pursue gloom and introduce it into the joy, such that the gloom itself bonds with the joy. We're going to bring all of these feelings in together. Hashem doesn't want us to be simplistic, to have simple emotions. He wants the complicated. He wants the mess. He wants us to stand in that kitchen with the slamming doors and the whistles blasting, and to say, I'm here, I'm present. Even if it doesn't feel like what I think happiness is supposed to feel like what I told my student. I think that happiness is supposed to be simple. The goal isn't to be happy. The goal is to be present. The goal is to be thoughtful. The goal is to be connected to something that's bigger than us. I want to finish with one more story. So at a different school, I was working in elementary school, and I was working as a school guidance counselor. And one of the tricks of the trade is, if you want to see what really goes down in a school, you need to go outside and watch what happens at recess. That's when the real stuff goes down. So I went outside and I saw my buddy Matthew, and he was holding a basketball, and he was playing by himself really nicely. And all of a sudden these big kids came over and they yanked the basketball away from him. And it was one of those moments as an educator where you have that choice of am I going to step in and am I going to stand up for him and punish these kids? Or am I going to give it a little bit of space, see what happens, see how it plays out? And at that exact moment, Matthew gave me a look and was like, do not come over here. Do not. So I didn't. And then after recess, I went back to my office, and I was sitting in my office, and I just felt badly that I didn't step in, that I didn't help him, that I didn't know how to engage or to do something without embarrassing him. And within seconds, I heard a knock on my door. I opened the door, it's Matthew. And he's like, I need your help, Bailey. And I was like, anything, whatever you want, I'm yours. And he said, no, I need help being me. And it's one of the bravest things I ever heard anybody say. And I think it's the real tefillah. It's the real prayer. Every day we stand in front of God and we knock on the door and we say, I need help being me. And me is complicated. Me wants to play by myself with my ball, and life keeps taking my ball from me. And I don't know if I should stand up for myself. I don't know if I should be mad at you, God, or loving with you, God, or feel alone, or feel connected, or go beyond myself, or take the step, or not. I just need your help. I need help being me. And while that question to God and to ourselves can be painful, it also can be with real simcha, of knowing who to ask the question to, and knowing that we have the potential to build a life of real meaning within all of the complexity, instead of just waiting for it to be perfect. To come to God and say, I need help being me. I think that that's the greatest lesson of Elisheva. And I think that it's so inspiring to me that she's given as the example of what it means to be happy. Because it's not simple. It's not somebody who got everything that they wanted. It's somebody who really suffered and who had the gift and blessing of being surrounded by greatness, but also of knowing real suffering. I think that's how most of us are. So I give us all a blessing that the family resemblance to our foremother Elisheva should be striking. That we should walk through this world with pride in our ability to create our own happiness and find happiness within. That we should cling like she does to the skyhooks that God places in our life. And that we should be able to dance with happiness and sadness with coming of Mashiach very